Eve, welcome to hashtag World Food Day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, Eve, the first thing I want to ask you is, could you tell us about yourself and your journey to this point?
Yes. So I started off my career as a writer, doing creative nonfiction writing and really focused on recipes. I fell in love with food because it was a way for me to study everything. Food is religion, it's economics, it's politics, it's everything. And I was working as a recipe developer, and I ended up writing 2 books on the why behind the rise of foodie culture. I became completely obsessed with this topic. And my first book was focused in the United States. Second was international. And I had a really lucky career. I got to work with a lot of major food companies and hospitality companies, essentially helping them figure out what millennials want and figuring out what the next kind of set of products were going to be and how to market them. And then around 2019, I decided to become a parent, which changed the frame of mind that I was in and really started to think about, well, what is my responsibility in bringing new life into this world? And I also was starting to become more and more aware of the problems with the food system. I was reading tons of reports that were opening my eyes to the fact that food accounts for 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. In the United States, about 1/3 to 40% of food goes uneaten. Food is the #1 cause of biodiversity loss and deforestation. I can go on and on. It's depressing. But in all of that, I also was finding the solutions. And what I was reading was ultimately showing me that food systems are the solution to the climate crisis. They are the solution to biodiversity loss, to soil health degradation. And the real nugget in here, again, I'd spent at this point almost a decade doing research on foodie culture. So things like avocado toast and matcha lattes, and why are these things becoming popular? And what I saw is that the solution to the climate crisis in the food system is not at all in conflict with today's top food trends. But you would never know that from the way people talk about it. The way people talk about sustainable ways of eating is always framed in the negative. It's about what we need to be giving up. Most people, when you talk about sustainable food, they think it's too expensive, it's elitist, it's not going to taste good, this is not me. And it cannot be further from the truth. The reality is that we need to be eating a greater diversity of foods. And from a foodie perspective, there are a lot of ridiculously delicious things out there for us to be eating that we are not yet discovering. And we can do so affordably and accessibly that's culturally relevant. And once I learned that, it really changed my career, and I pivoted. And now I'm running Food for Climate League, which I founded in 2019 with an amazing cohort of individuals. Dorothy Shaver might also be a part of this program. The head of food and sustainability at Unilever was among the thought leaders who I collaborated with to get Food for Climate League off the ground. We will be changing our name soon, so stay tuned for that. But it's an amazing organization that I'll tell you more about in a little bit. But that's my journey to right now.
So before we talk about the organization, because obviously I really want to hear about the vision of that and how we can all participate and become involved. But before that, what's worrying you most about where we are at this point in our history? And I ask that question to be empowered in many ways, because if we know what the main concern is, then we might have the opportunity to help.
Yes. So my career, again, in this space really started with this obsession with answering this idea of why is it that young people in particular around the world are spending a disproportionate amount of our discretionary time and money on food and food media. And this is global, and this is across socioeconomic spectrums. Even people without money are sometimes spending it on things that maybe other people are judging, and they're sleeping in their parents' basement in order to do it. Or they're spending their time on their phone watching someone slurp noodles or cut in a molten chocolate cake. This really is a universal thing. And underneath all of that, what my research ended up drawing me to was rising rates of anxiety, stress, depression, and loneliness. And we as a global community are increasingly using food as a coping mechanism for unmet human needs on an emotional scale. And one of the primary things that is concerning me is that I started this research about a decade and a half ago. Those rates of anxiety and stress and depression and loneliness have only gotten worse. And of course, COVID is a large part of this. The digital age is a large part of this. But I would say that mental health issues are a major concern because that does ultimately impact our relationship to food, the bandwidth that we have to be changing our habits, our willingness to have hope, our ability to have hope and function through that lens. So, number one, that is something that does concern me about the world and how our level of resilience in this moment. And what is that going to look like? The next is really the basics of just where our environment is at, of global warming, of soil health, of water, of acidification. These things, if you pay attention, it's really easy to feel hopeless, honestly. I mean, the data is not in the great place. And from where I stand, yes, there's amazing investments that are happening in solar, in wind energy, in electric vehicles. There is not enough investment at the nexus of climate and food systems. So when you really look at the money that is going towards food systems, it pales in comparison to the impact of food systems. Again, food accounts for a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, yet we only get 1.5 to 3% of climate philanthropy. That is a massive issue because we cannot solve the climate crisis without addressing the food system. I think fossil fuels get a lot of attention, which is great. Again, it's 70% of the problem, but we're not going to get all the way there without addressing the other 30%. And the other 30% is so achievable. It's really not complicated. Waste less food, eat more plants. And again, there's ways of doing this that are exciting. That is not about taking things away. It's really about celebrating the parts of the plant that people are tossing out. It's about saving money. It's about celebrating your culture and your heritage. It's about celebrating global cuisines that are inherently plant forward. This is not a dangerous or scary kind of approach to solving the climate crisis. And I am, though, afraid of really the wrong messaging. Because what's been used so far is we need to take your burgers away. We have to take your plastic straws away. You're going to be eating waste, which who really wants to eat waste, even though like butter is a waste product, right? There's ways of reframing this conversation. And that is what gives me hope, but it's also what makes me nervous. And then the final thing here is really just people's belief that it's possible. What we have found is that perception is the number one barrier. It's not the system itself. It's what people perceive the changes to be, how hard they perceive it to be, how uncomfortable they perceive it to be. This really is a mental game. We have the solutions. We can make this happen, and we can make it happen on the timeline that we need. We can make sure that everybody is fed with nutritious, accessible, and delicious foods. It's literally just the mindset. And that mindset holds back investment, it holds back action, and that is really what makes me nervous. It's not that the solutions don't exist. They do, and we do have time still in order to act.
You make me think of a phrase, I think it was in a Paulo Coelho book, I think it was in The Alchemist. He said something like, the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself. Which I think is the point that you're making. You know, we just got to go for it and attack this.
And I don't know that it really is worse than the suffering itself, but it's certainly, in this case, the fear of suffering is going to cause suffering, right? It's a catch-22. And that is really what does make me nervous. It's the top of the list of concerns for this moment.
Okay, let's now talk about what you're doing next. I mean, I'd love you to talk about the books, but I'd love you to also just talk about the organization, what the strategy is going to be.
Yes. So Food for Climate League launched in 2019. And to be honest, we launched thinking that we were going to do a direct-to-consumer campaign on how to make climate smart eating cool. Okay, so that plan very quickly went out the window. And there's many reasons for that. Number one is that most people care about the climate already. It's just that making a climate smart food decision is really difficult. For a lot of people, it's not accessible. It's not easy for them to do. And of course, there's the perception issues. And so when you really think about, well, okay, how do we change people's perception of sustainable ways of eating? And when I say sustainable, by the way, Food for Climate League has a very broad definition. We are a yes and organization. We believe in it all. We believe in sustainable aquatic foods. We believe in regenerative foods. We believe in plant forward. We believe in reducing waste and using all of what we have. There are so many ways to eat that are better for the planet, and we believe that we need every single solution in order to get us there. But the work that we do is really around reframing the conversation. And by and large, we work with food service operators. How do you make these food choices more appealing and more widely available? You need to be talking to the power holders behind the food system, the people who decide what ends up on a menu. When you go to your dining hall in your university, when you're in a hospital system, corporate dining, a stadium, how do you make sure that the meals that are on offer are more biodiverse, are wasting less food in the preparation, are more plant forward? So a lot of the work that Food for Climate League does is about changing the way that chefs and marketers think about sustainable food choices and then ultimately how they act. We also are beginning to engage content creators and influencers, because when you really also want to be changing people's perception of what's normal, what's approachable, what's easy, what's desirable, we got to also be talking to the people who are setting the tone for what makes things cool. That's in part chefs. It's in part the people who are cooking on TikTok and on YouTube. And so Food for Climate League is also engaging those actors. And we also do one-on-one work with different companies. We work with Disneyland. We work with Google. We're working with a number of organizations, with universities as well, to help them really align their menus with guest interests. And this is kind of the number one thing at Food for Climate League. So we work on narrative change, which is change the way you talk about sustainable foods, and behavior change. How do you make these choices easy? How do you make it just the inherent normal choice in the environment? Those are things like change the order in which the food is served, change the plate size so you're reducing waste. These are very, very simple things. And narrative change can be use tasty titles on a menu. It can be training and upskilling your staff and framing this in a way that connects things to their own personal heritage so that they get it. They understand why this is being asked of them and they're excited about it. So a lot of the work we do is around perception change, narrative change, behavior change. But the biggest I think the biggest secret about what it is that we do and why it works is we connect it to food trends. Again, today's biggest food trends are bending in a more sustainable direction. If you look at the top things that are being searched on YouTube, it's like dense bean salad and cucumber salad. And yes, it's Travis Kelce's mom's cookies as well and things like that. But most of the top trends today are not meat heavy. The vast majority of this is trending in a more sustainable direction. And so a lot of what we do is also working with companies so that they can see benefits to their profit by doing the sustainable thing. Particularly here in the United States, everyone knows we're in a dangerous moment when it comes to climate action. So how do we continue to push things forward? For a lot of companies, we need to show them that there isn't a business risk in doing this. There's a business benefit. And so a lot of the work that we do at Food for Climate League is focused on what do eaters actually want? What do people really want to be eating? How do you deliver on it in a way that is also going to benefit your sustainability goals as an organization? But everything is about deliciousness. How do we create a world that people want to eat in, that they're excited to eat in? And yes, that companies are also going to drive a profit from, because we're not kidding ourselves about the world that we live in. And we need to play into how decisions are being made. And people aren't going to do this just because they think it's the right thing to do, unfortunately, from a business standpoint. And so we're realistic about that. And we also want to make sure that people are having fun. Again, rising rates of anxiety, depression, stress, loneliness. We've got to infuse this with some joy. And so that's really what we're about. How do you create some joyful, delicious, wonderful moments for people that can feel celebratory rather than feeling like something's being taken away from you?
It's a wonderful example of, you often hear people saying that the choices that we make as an individual can really change things. I mean, you've just summed it up, that is an absolutely true statement. And that's really exciting. What a wonderful thing to hear. I want to ask you finally, how do people get in touch? Where do we go?
Yes. So go to foodforclimateleague.org. Again, food for, F-O-R, Climate League, like a leagueofchampions.org. Again, we will be changing our name in January, so sign up for our newsletter so that you can stay in the loop. If you want to learn more about me, I'm at eveturow.paul.com. Turow is with one R, Turow, Paul, Paul.com. If you want to learn more about the way that we look at food and food trends, you can always get my book, Hungry. But Food for Climate League is really the best place to follow the action that's happening in this space and to get involved. I'm really excited about where this organization is going and growing to. I am mostly hopeful in this moment, believe it or not. There's a lot of action that is working, and that's what is making me excited. Yes, you can read the headlines. It's really easy to feel down on things, but the work at Food for Climate League, our projects are legitimately making a difference, legitimately making an impact. And we're at this amazing point in time right now where we need to scale. We know what works. We need to get into more institutions. We need to get more people involved. And we would love anyone who wants to help us on that journey.
Eve, absolutely incredible work. We wish you the very best on your journey.
Thank you so much.